In part 1 of this documentary, we told you the story: a sacred city, a divine king, a war that destroyed a civilization from within, and a sea that swallowed everything 7 days after it ended. That was the myth. Now we have a problem, because off the western coast of India, in the Gulf of Khambhat, sonar has found something at 36 meters depth: geometric shapes, angular formations, material dated to 9,500 years before the present. And in March 2026, preliminary surveys reported structural anomalies extending 8 kilometers into the Arabian Sea. At 36 meters, that number again. This is part 2. This is where the science comes back. And this is where the silence begins. Imagine you are back at Dwarka in 2025. The divers are in the water again. The sonar is cleaner. The grids are tighter. The technology is better than anything S.R. Rao had in 1983. New campaigns conducted by the Archaeological Survey of India's Underwater Archaeology Wing, led by Professor C. Alok Tripathi, have opened a new chapter. February 2025, surveys around Gomti Creek and the 56 CD. The ancient stone stairway leading down to the Dwarkadish temple. March 2025, side scan and multi-beam sonar grids completed across the Okamandal offshore zone. Jetty wall alignments detected. Anchor clusters re-identified. New anomaly chains mapped at depths of 3 to 12 meters. November 2025. Further documentation at Gomti Ghat. Navy divers assisting in excavation limited operations. And then, in March 2026, a claim that changed the scale of the entire conversation. Preliminary georadar surveys reported structural anomalies extending approximately 8 kilometers into the Arabian Sea at around 36 meters depth. That number again, 36. Not yet independently verified, not yet published in full peer review, but real enough that the Jerusalem Post, India Today, and the Times of India all carried the story. And if that 8-kilometer field resolves into a coherent architectural system, then Dwarka is no longer a ruin. It is an inventory problem. Because we need to understand what 8 kilometers actually means. Manhattan, the most famous urban island on Earth, covers roughly 59 square kilometers of land. If this anomaly field is real and coherent, the entire footprint of Manhattan's Central District would fit inside it twice, not metaphorically, geometrically, twice. Because we may have only mapped the shallow edge of something much deeper. Now here, I want to show you the sky. Not because the sky solves anything, but because the sky holds a question that the seabed cannot yet answer. Astronomical researchers have reconstructed the celestial conditions above the Indian subcontinent around 3102 BCE. Using modern planetarium software, the night sky over Dwarka's coordinates, 22 degrees 14 minutes north, 68 degrees 57 minutes east, can be rendered with precision for any date in the past several thousand years. And what the Mahabharata describes in the sky matches. Saturn positioned near the nakshatra Rohini, Mars in retrograde motion, a lunar eclipse in the month of Kartika, a solar eclipse following approximately 13 days later. Those are not common events. Researchers found fewer than 2 dates in 5,000 years of celestial history that satisfy all major conditions simultaneously. One of them is 3067 BCE. But here is the unsettling part. Because if the submerged structures of Dwarka were deliberately oriented, if stairways, jetty walls, or sacred axes align with the positions of Saturn or Rohini, or the ecliptic path visible on that specific night, then the ruins are not just physical remains. They are a clock, a record of when the city believed it stood at the center of the universe. That test has not been conducted. No magnetometric survey of the Dwarkadish Temple Foundation has been published that cross-references alignment with the 3102 BCE celestial frame. But the hypothesis is testable, and testable hypotheses are where science lives. Now, let us leave the sky and return to the water, because above this entire story floats a global mechanism that no local investigation can explain away. It is called Meltwater Pulse 1b. It occurred approximately 11,300 years ago. Over a period of perhaps 300 to 500 years, global sea levels rose by approximately 40 meters. 40 meters, the equivalent of a 12-story building added to every coastline on Earth in a few human generations. Every coastal plain, every river delta, every settlement within reach of the sea, changed, drowned, gone. The western coast of India was not exempt. The Arabian Sea margin, the Gulf of Khambhat, the ancient delta systems of the Sabarmati and Mahi rivers. All of these were exposed land surfaces during the last glacial maximum. People lived there. We know this because people lived along every continental shelf that was exposed during glacial low stands. And when the sea came, it did not ask permission. It rose, and it kept rising. The 36-meter depth of the Khambhat Anomalies is not a random number. It is a geological timestamp. Material at that depth was above water or barely submerged in shallow coastal water during the early Holocene transgression, which means the drowned world of the Gulf of Khambhat is not a local Indian phenomenon. It is one chapter of a planetary story. And Dwarka may not be the city that Krishna built. It may be the memory of a coastline that an entire civilization watched disappear. Let us be precise with language, because cover-up is a word that closes conversations. And what happened at Dwarka and Khambhat deserves a more accurate description: passive censorship. This is how it works. A discovery is announced before it is proven. The announcement generates excitement and political capital. Critics attack the methodology. Funding becomes politically complicated. No institution wants to own the controversy. The anomaly survives, but the investigation does not. And slowly, without a single document being classified, without a single file being locked away, the research simply stops. This is what happened after 2001. The NIOT Khambhat findings were announced to Parliament in May of that year. But the full technical report, with complete methods, site maps, stratigraphic context, and peer-reviewed interpretation, was never published in a standard scientific journal. The dredged material was partially analyzed, but not fully contextualized. The sonar data was never independently verified by a second institution. And by 2003, the major operations had ended, not because the case was closed, because no one was willing to reopen it. Now go back further, to the 1960s, when H.D. Sankalia conducted the earliest modern excavations on Bet Dwarka Island. His teams uncovered a more complex occupation history than the sacred narrative required. Not one city, a layered site, a palimpsest of occupations, material predating any plausible connection to the Krishna tradition. That complexity never became the official story. The official story needed a city for Krishna, not a Paleolithic sequence, not a Mesolithic delta community. not proof that this coastline had been home to human populations for far longer than any mythology needed it to be. Those earlier layers remained in reports, in archive storage, in footnotes, and at minute 28, I will give you a name: S.R. Rao, the archaeologist who changed Dwarka, who first systematically documented the submerged anchors, the walls, the stairways, who published The Lost City of Dwarka in 1988 and put the marine archaeology of this coast on the global map, and who, in his later years, watched follow-up funding evaporate. A proposed preservation project worth 14 crore rupees, rejected. A man who had forced the world to take Dwarka seriously, unable to secure the resources to excavate it further. He died in 2000, the same year the Khambhat sonar discovered its anomalous shapes. He never saw what the deeper water might hold. This is not a government conspiracy. This is something more commonplace, and in many ways, more troubling. Science is not neutral in practice, it is funded, and funding follows consensus. When a site becomes controversial, it does not get more investigation, it gets less. The classified strata of Dwarka are not locked in a vault. They are buried in postponed fieldwork, in incomplete reports, in the gap between what the sonar saw and what archaeology chose to excavate. Imagine you are diving again, not into clear blue water, into mud, Holocene mud, sediment laid down by thousands of years of moving shorelines, rivers carrying memory to the sea, storms reshaping every claim about what was permanent. You descend through the present, and you enter the classified strata. Somewhere below, you may be a harbor from the late Bronze Age, a working port, anchors, walls, merchants, monsoon seasons counted in knots and tides. Below that, perhaps an older community, a Chalcolithic village near the river mouth. Below that, perhaps a Mesolithic settlement, people living on a delta that was slowly becoming an estuary, watching the water rise. Below that, perhaps nothing but geology, or perhaps the first faint outlines of a human world erased by rising seas before history learned to write. This is the frequency of Dwarka, not certainty, resonance. A sacred text remembers a city the sea reclaimed. Marine archaeology finds a real submerged coastal complex. Paleoclimate science confirms that vast coastal worlds vanished during post-glacial flooding. Modern sonar hints that the visible ruins may only be the shallow edge of something larger. What if Dwarka is not one city? What if it is a stack of disappearances? A place that was lost and lost again across 7,000 years. A memory made of multiple catastrophes, compressed into one surviving story about one divine king and one morning when the sea crossed its boundary. That would explain the contradiction. The astronomical date, the archaeological date, the drowned depth, the silence. It would mean that the Mahabharata is not wrong. It is composite, a memory that contains all the drownings, all the moments when the sea came and took something that should have lasted. Researchers working across the paleoclimate record, the stratigraphic layers of Bet Dwarka, and the coastal geology of the Arabian margin have identified not one but multiple episodes of marine transgression affecting this coastline. They call it, informally, the 7 destructions, 7 distinct moments, separated by centuries or millennia, when rising water, storm surge, or tectonic shift altered the coast so violently that the human world built on top of it had to begin again. 7 times. Dwarka didn't die once. According to the geological record, it died 7 times, and someone was there for all of them. And it would leave us with the most unsettling question of all. Not whether Dwarka was real. The submerged structures confirm something was real. The real question is how much of the human coast is still missing. Because if 8 kilometers of anomaly are only the beginning, if the drowned shelves of the Arabian Sea hold more than one submerged distortion, if the classified strata beneath the Holocene mud contain communities, harbors, planting seasons, names, then Dwarka is not an exception. It is an introduction to a world we have not yet chosen to excavate. Because the sea does not negotiate. It does not preserve the things we value above the things we do not. It simply rises and waits, and eventually the mud remembers everything. The mud remembers everything, but we have barely begun to ask it questions. The submerged shelves of the Arabian Sea contain more than one drowned coastline, more than one Dwarka, more than one morning when the sea crossed its boundary and no one was left to write it down. If you have watched both parts of this documentary, you already know that this story is not finished. It has not been excavated. It has not been funded. It has not been asked the right questions yet. That is what this channel exists to do. One documentary every week on the things that official history has not yet chosen to look at directly. Subscribe if that is the kind of question you want to live with. Leave a comment telling us which part unsettled you most. We read everyone, and sometimes the comments become the next documentary. There are more drowned coasts, more silenced sciences. Terra Incognita will find them.